Hey, good
Hey,
afternoon. Hey, good afternoon. Good morning. Who knows? Welcome to South by Southwest. This is not how I imagined attending this year, but I did imagine attending with my good friend and esteemed author of Weapons of Math Destruction, scientist, data scientist, mathematician, all-round genius, Cathy O'Neil. So I'm really thrilled that we're both at South by Southwest. I'm kind of bummed that we're not in a bar. So we're going to talk to you for half an hour about on the subject of AI will not solve your Nazi problem. So, Cathy, welcome.
thank you. And now I get to introduce you, which is really exciting. Emily is a journalist, and she invented podcasting at The Guardian, and also she's been running the Tau Center for a decade, and she also founded the Tau Center on digital media. And the thing about it is, like, I met Emily because I worked for like a very short amount of time at the Columbia Journalism School, starting this like data journalism thing, and she recruited me, and obviously she got me. And ever since then, we've basically been either listening to bluegrass, drinking bourbon, or singing karaoke, or some combination thereof. And what's ironic about it is, even though she knows all sorts of things that I really want to know, I've never ever actually had the opportunity to ask her these questions. So I'm really happy to be here.
Likewise, I have more to ask you. People are here to hear from you. You have a new book coming out as well. Is that
I
yet the
do,
pro?
I do.
Or are you not talking about
Um,
it?
it's coming out next May. So if
Oh,
I started
okay.
talking about it now, I think I would
Well,
have to stab
we
myself.
can come back. We're going to come
We'll
back
come
and talk
back. We'll come back.
this year.
So
So
so here's my first question, Emily. Are you ready?
I'm
I mean,
ready.
literally, and before I'm just going to tee it up a little bit by saying, like, I feel like I might know a little bit more about misinformation and like fringe groups because of my research on my shame book. By the way, the new book that's coming out in a year is called The Shame Machine. And I sort of tried to understand how people get into these little rabbit holes and stuff. Um, but I know, I guess I'd say I know more than the average person, but I don't know nearly as much as somebody who actually knows about this stuff. So I have really dumb questions, and it's delightful that I get to pretend that I'm just asking for the sake of the audience. and, and so my
Well,
first question is, like, literally, like, is this a new thing? I mean, and how new is it? And like, what about it is new? Is it just the scale that's new? And like, what? Because and okay, I'll just start with that.
yeah. Is it new? No. Um, Media enabled extremism is not new. And in fact, what we think of modern era propaganda, because that's what it was called back in the day, really comes from it's really a combination of things that happened after the or during the First World War and the Second World War. And America had a fair role in thinking about how to influence audiences with something called the Creel Committee in the First World War, which is just a wild kind of story if you want to look it up, which was this effort to get American civilians to back America joining the First World War. The Creel Committee was actually run by an investigative journalist, but the purpose of it was to train influencers, 7,500 of them, to go to things like cinemas and stand up and deliver on script live lectures about why you should support the war. And like all of these mechanisms for spreading messages, they change every time you have a change of technology. And what happened between 1918 and the 1930s was, of course, that you had an increase in the uptake of radio spectrum. So radio became a thing. It was invented, the BBC, where I come from, the UK, was invented really as a way to stop propagandists and stop misinformation spreaders holding on to the radio spectrum so that the government could spread its own misinformation. And then, of course, the real master of this was Joseph Goebbels and the Nazi Party in the 1930s. So when we say this will not solve your Nazi problem, those are the roots of it. Is it different now? There's debate about that, but clearly, yes, it is. Because there's the scale of it, there's the speed of it, there's the fact that it's not often rooted just in certain geographies. It's rooted in, I mean, it's always been rooted in ideology, but it now spreads so much more easily, not just between districts within the same country, but internationally as well. And it's also just much harder to see. I know that sounds like a very basic and stupid thing to say, but um, we see an awful lot of information coming through our various social feeds. That we don't know really where it comes from. We are engaging with conversations with people often that we don't know, or we might feel that we know them, we don't really know them. So the mediated environment has definitely changed how we experience this. The fundamental mechanics of it and the way that people deploy it hasn't really changed, but the scale, the speed, the way that it can move, like all other media, has changed dramatically. So I kind of want to
Right.
ask you, can I ask you a question now, Cathy?
Yeah, yeah, go for it. Yeah. I mean,
Which
we
is,
could just throw out the script. I mean, it's gone. Yeah.
oh, well, you know, well, one thing you're an expert in, and I'm definitely not an expert in, is this re-engineering of algorithms, or reverse engineering of algorithms to sort of audit how people are targeted, how again, information or misinformation spreads between populations. So when you've been looking at auditing algorithms in your professional life, um,
Yeah.
how do you relate that to this kind of problem of information and perception, and how we think about things? Because it's not quite the same as, I mean, it's using targeting, marketing,
Yeah.
technology, but it's not quite the same because it's presented as free speech or expression, or what have you.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the most I mean, I was going to talk about this a little later, but I'll talk about it now. Like this is the thing that fascinates and scares me the most about this topic, which is that like the techniques I use and I do audit algorithms, the basic framework I employ would be completely useless for this problem. So to be clear, what I do, in a given sort of narrow context, which is what my job is, you know, um, insurance company wants to decide how much to charge for health insurance, type thing. Well, then the stakeholders are clear, the stakes are high, but it's very narrow as a decision goes. And so you could say, well, and the basic framework is who cares? Like, who are the stakeholders? How do they define success and how do they define failure? And to what extent will this algorithm in this context have an existential threat? Like, will it be really badly performing in some aspect in that matrix of
Right.
stakeholders and decisions, like definitions of success or failure? So in other words, it's large, but it's a finite a two-dimensional set of concerns and stakeholders intersecting. So it's finite. So you can like go through every single one of those boxes and be like, oh, this probably won't happen, or this might happen. We should keep an eye on that, or whatever. Or this is definitely happening. We should mitigate that problem. Let's go do that. And if we can't do that, we'll just turn this off because it won't work. That's the kind of calculus that we employ, and it's not real. It's, you know what I mean? Like, what are the stakeholders for Facebook? Who are the stakeholders? Like, literally everyone is a
Right.
stakeholder.
Right.
Even people who never signed onto Facebook are affected by its algorithm and by this misinformation. So it is infinite. And for that reason, I'm just like, oh my god. So I mean, I'm gonna go just dive right into my second question, which is like,
Cool.
you certainly, like, way more people are influencers now, and they're not government sponsored necessarily, or they might be government sponsored but by Russia or another country. What, so I guess, when did things start looking troublesome for the, big platforms, and what did they say they were going to do? Because like from my perspective, it's like, this is an obvious problem. They keep saying they're going to do something, nothing happens. Like, is that just the story? Is there
So
anything more to it?
so that's a really great question. So I think you can trace this back to, when did the big platforms say that they weren't going to do anything, and when did that change? So
Yes.
Facebook has been around since about 2005. Twitter's been around since 2007. Google has been around for much longer than that, but YouTube, which is another source of these problems has been around from, again, about sort of 2005, 2006. And at the outset, the whole model for creating platforms was you could do this in a way that enabled you to scale, to grow bigger, if you did not have to deal with or didn't. So it's not just even if you didn't have to, but if just that you hadn't really built any mechanism or expectation that you would be looking at things as they were posted. You can't look at a billion videos as they're put up on YouTube. You can't look at, a kind of billion conversations or a trillion data points as people interact with each other on Facebook. So, it's not so much that I think Facebook, Google, Twitter started off saying we don't, we have no intention of being publishing platforms. They genuinely didn't think that they were. And they hadn't worked as I had in a news organization where you had things like talk boards, which were just a perpetual source of alarm and problem because you want free flowing conversations, and we had like about 10,000 comments a month on the Guardian. But actually, once you allow free flowing conversations to happen, you experience something which happens in all unregulated markets. And I use the financial analogy for this, which is something called Gresham's law, which says if you have an unregulated market in an economic setting, then good money, so in other words, people doing ethical, good things with their money, are always driven out by bad money. So you need regulation in the market, otherwise people gaming the system will always drive out the good money. And in the speech market, because it's never been electronic, the principle of the First Amendment in America is that if you have a bunch of people telling lies or misleading people, then the counterbalance to that is people telling the truth or pointing out where the lies are wrong. And the market, that marketplace of ideas we hear so much about, gradually reaches consensus around things that are true. And but once you get into an electronic marketplace, which is exactly the same in some ways, I know that you know much, again, you've worked in the finance sector, you know much more about this than I do, but the underpinning platforms are ad exchanges. They are very like real-time trading systems, and they govern speech and targeting in the same way that they govern advertising messages. They aggregate our preferences, they put us into places where they think we'll see more of what we like, all of that. So,
Yeah.
So the starting point for we don't think we're going to do anything about it just becomes untenable as you become really the central place where people expect news to happen and conversations to happen. So we went from thinking about things as social media, separate from mainstream media, to thinking about just media or media experiences. And at that point, and I would say that certainly the year 2000, 2013, 2014 was really when people began to say, hang on a second, we're seeing things in our feed because you've balanced in a certain way. Zeynep Tufekci, the great sociologist, Zeynep was very early on in saying, I'm seeing completely different things on Facebook about protests in Turkey to the things that I'm seeing on Twitter. And that's very powerful in the political arena. And from that moment onwards, there was just a growing discussion of, what are you going to do about this? And the answer to 2 or 3 years was no.
Yeah,
And
so I mean, so I would, just from the algorithmic perspective of what you've just said, I'll just do the, my very dry, nerdy version of that, which is that the algorithm gave us, profiled us, gave us more of what they thought we would eat, optimizing on the stupidest possible thing, which is how long do we spend on Facebook, or long do we spend on, how many clicks do we give them, which is their profit, straight up proxy of profit that was easy to measure and nothing else. So very dumb, very, very dumb. Although lots of information, lots of data to profile us and decide what to serve us that would keep us there. So sort of dumb, but also very informed. And then 2018 rolls around. Zuckerberg is hauled before Congress, and this is what I get really interested in this misinformation question, because he says, "Oh, AI is going to fix that. You know, we're working on this, and AI is going to solve this problem." And that's what I'm like, "Oh no, it's not. It's not going to." And it's not going to because, you know, at that time, of course, I'll just really quickly throw out why
Yay!
it wasn't. I knew it wasn't going to work. You know, we were hearing about, oh, Go is a computer plays Go better than humans. Computer play checkers and chess better than humans. And I was like, oh, that's really not that impressive, because those are very well defined tiny little universes where the definition of success is obvious and everyone agrees on it. Whereas the definition of success is the problem here. The
Right.
definition of success is keeping us on Facebook, and the very, very clear indirect definition of success, like the indirect result of that was serve us things we disagree about, serve us things that we fight about. So we are so outraged that we stay on Facebook, or we're so obsessed and conspiracy minded that we stay on Facebook to learn more. Um, so the definition of success is in fact the problem here. But the real thing is that the Facebook's algorithm, and I'm just going to focus on Facebook because it's an obvious focal point, never really thought of it in a complicated way, never really understood it in a complicated way, and in particular will never be able to infer truth from misinformation. There was no model for truth. There was like AI doesn't have a model for truth.
So right there, okay, this is it. So this is the question. Not having a model for truth. What does that? So when Zuckerberg goes to Congress, and
Yeah,
let's say the big reveal was the 2016 election, where people went, "Hang on a second, there's all sorts of stuff on your platform." He was like, "No, no,
right.
no, it's negligible. It didn't really do anything." And now we're in a state where I don't know. There are riots in the Capitol.
Yeah,
There are people not wearing masks because they believe things which are not fundamentally true. Um,
right.
so when you say it doesn't have a model for truth, Facebook has actually persisted in saying, let's take things down when the AI is
Yeah.
recognized as being
Yes.
adjacent to things that we think of misinformation. So why is that not working? Or maybe
Well,
it
see,
is.
and yeah, so right, so like the here's the evolution. Like we won't do anything because everything's great and we're connecting people. And the next one is like, okay, so there's the bad stuff, but AI is going to solve that problem. And now like we know AI didn't solve that problem because again, 2016, 20, I mean, Capital, whatever. The most recent stuff. I mean, there's how many times you want to prove something, but what's ironic to me, and this is what comes back to the question of media, and policies, um, and your post-it notes in the Guardian, like their newest thing is like, oh, actually, we're going to have a moderating board, and we're going to like think through it with people because AI doesn't work. And actually, it's a little bit more complicated than that, as I understand it. And tell me if you understand it the same. It's actually a sort of two-fold system, and I draw it like this: like I have two axes in mind, and the first axis is, um, did someone flag it as a problematic content? And that could be an AI or it could be a human flagging it. There's different media platforms have different flagging systems. But AI flags basically mean you use the keyword Nazi or whatever it is. It was like really dumb because again, AI doesn't have a model for truth. So AI is going to go with really dumb things like, are you actually mentioning this term, like keyword searches, or something almost as obvious as keyword searches? So we won't have time for that. But the point is, it's very easy to bypass that AI capturing system. And of course, as you point out, the paid influencers who are building propaganda, they're very, very good at gaming that system, right? That's what they spend all day doing.
Right.
So
And
that and to sorry, just to finish my two axes, like, and not only does AI not pick up everything that's actually bad, but if you deliver it to the people who want to hear it, the people don't flag things as bad even when it's bad. So that's one of the filters. The other filter is the policy itself. So like if it gets flagged, it gets sent to this moderating committee, maybe just a group of people, maybe a very fancy group of people if it's the AI, if the Facebook oversight board, but then they have to compare what they're looking at to the policies, which again might have flaws as well. We know that it does, and we know like TikTok has been getting in a lot of trouble for taking down, you know, black women talking about lingerie, but not white women talking about lingerie in exactly the same context. So there's that bad policy problem too. And then of course, so all I'm saying is that there's this, it's an and statement on top of all of it. You know, you have to be flagged and found to be bad for a piece of
Yeah.
content to be removed. So that's three quadrants of bad stuff that's not even being touched.
Right.
And you know what I mean? And like that's those are the false negatives, but there's also false positives. It's just my point is that it's a total mess, but we've come full circle. Like we've like, oh, we don't want to say what's bad. AI is going to
Yes.
solve that problem. So AI is going to like sort of cover for the lack of moderation. And
Yeah.
now we're having moderation covering for the lack of working AI.
Right.
I
Right.
mean,
Which is
and so
really happening. Which is the, and then we have a fourth factor. So we saw in Poland yesterday, the government saying you can't take things down. It's actually illegal to take things down if we post them. And I'm not calling the current Polish government Nazis necessarily, but I'm saying that they're not very pro-democratic. So suddenly you have this extra factor, which is we are scared that your moderation and your AI will start to work against us. That in fact, human decisions. So the decision to take away Donald Trump's Facebook page, you don't need an AI for that. You just need one person, Mark
that's
Zuckerberg, to
right.
say that. So are we then looking at, so question, can we solve the problem of bad speech? And by bad speech I mean extremist speech, misinformation, things that cause people to do things that um, damage themselves, damage democracy, whatever. Is that even an aim that we should have in our minds?
I mean, it just certainly appeals to me. It appeals to me, but having said that, like, I mean, I'm willing to go there. Like, you and I both have three sons, right?
We
And what
do.
I find really amazing about my three sons is that all three of them are much more likely to identify fake content than my mother is. You know, and my
Right.
mother's, by the way, a computer scientist who helped build the internet. She's very savvy technologically, but she's
Right.
not savvy in that particular sense. So it's kind of like herd immunity to misinformation, and that's that track. We're just like, let's just let everyone like bathe in misinformation to the point where we're like we finally figure out how to avoid it. But it's only obviously only the young people that would survive. And then there's a lot of approaches to sort of like trying to insist on accountability by the platforms, and
Yeah.
all of them, as far as I'm concerned, either are completely fake because they are just going over these exact things that we just talked about, AI not working and the moderation not being sufficient, or they immediately put these platforms out of business. Like
Right.
the Australia thing. Can you like tell me what you think of the Australia experiment?
Well, so it's a case of I hope both sides lose because you have Rupert Murdoch and the Australian government, neither of which I'm particularly fond of, versus, if you like, the platforms and their dominance. We need. So that's what I think about Australia, which is it shows that we're kind of grappling with needing the right interventions, and we haven't found them yet. And the result of that is, but it's a big question. So there's a big question there, which is, do you want countries to make determinations about their Nazi problem or about their news problem themselves? Or do you want those determinations to be made by corporate actors like Facebook and Google? And I think there are lots of very sort of interesting cultural questions in that. So Americans would say, let the companies decide. Europeans tend to say, I can vote out the government. So even if I don't like the government, even if I don't like the law, that's really where we should be focusing, which is on better regulation.
And where do you come
So
down?
where do I come down? I think they need more regulation. I think they need more regulation rather than less. And I think they should be regulated on, is what you're doing harmful? So there are brilliant people who've been working on things like frameworks in Europe saying, and this is where like your job is
Yeah.
so vital, which is how do you assess harm and risk
Yes.
in the things that
Oh, by
you're
the way, by
building?
the way, I meant to say earlier when I said that like my framework wouldn't work for Facebook's algorithm. What I meant to say is like I wouldn't work for Facebook. Like if Facebook said, "Could you audit our algorithm and mitigate harm?" and I'd be like, "Myanmar, no." Like just no. You like that who had that on their list? You know what I mean? Um but I would be happy to work for the attorney general if they could subpoena some data to display evidence of harm, because that is actually what I do. So and I mean I do think that the critically important thing that Facebook hasn't done yet is be more sort of generous with its data and with the harm it's creating.
So we enter the same place, which is AIs are not going to do this. We need to think about this as a risk assessment problem and a harm problem. And
Yes.
then we need culturally specific solutions which are rooted in law rather than a fancy board that neither you or I are on, incidentally. I've noticed that.
That's right. Thanks for the conversation, Emily. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you, Cathy, for the conversation. And we hope to see you all in person, South by Southwest, next year.